All right, all right, all right. Welcome, welcome, welcome. How is it going? Thank you so much for tuning in today, everyone who's joining us. If you're back here, let me just turn this volume down real quick. It's a little loud. There we go. That feels better. All right, let's get right into it. Today, we are going to be learning how to set up like the basic rigging for a 2D platformer. That's going to be things like movement, things like collision, just kind of the basic building blocks for putting together like an interesting 2D platformer. So I figured that'd be interesting knowing that you guys might be curious to know what I do as well, rather than just hanging out playing some games, which I do enjoy doing, but this is cool too. So I think this will be a fun experience for all of us. So let's get right in. So this is Unity. It's a 2021 version of Unity, but it is what we'll talk about here is pretty much usable in all versions for the most part, especially the more modern versions. It'll work in all of it. But you can see here I just have an empty project open that we can work with. Let's get some stuff going. I've already gone ahead and created a folder called scripts. We're going to be putting some of our simple folders in there. Well, not simple folders. We'll be making our scripts in there. But you can see if we right-click in Assets, we can just scroll up to Create and just click Folder. It's the top for both of them. So again, you're just going to right-click, Create Folder. It's a very, very simple way to make things. And again, if you right-click that folder, you can just delete that if you don't want it. So just so you know how I put that folder in there. Very, very simple to do. All right, so first thing we're going to need for our game here is a guy. We're going to need an object, right? We need our player. So we'll just give it a simple sprite. Let's make it a square. Squares are easy to see, easy to work with. There he is. You can see it kind of takes up 1 unit of Unity space there, like one of these little grids. And just for fun, we'll come over to color and we'll make him like blue. Yeah, now he really stands out there. Hey guy. Hello player, this is our guy. And what we're gonna do to our player here is we're going to come over to components on the right hand side, and we're going to go ahead and give him something called a rigid body 2D. And you'll notice when I click add component, this little drop down menu appears, and I can literally just search rigid body up here, whole thing, or the first couple letters work as well, and click rigid body 2D. Rigid body, the non 2D one, is for a 3D project or something where you would want this object to work in all 3 axes, not just X, which is left to right, and Y, which is up and down, but there's also Z, which is like towards and away from like your camera perspective, right? So a 3D game, if you were running away from the camera, that would be along the Y axis in most cases. Or sorry, Z axis, my apologies. All right, so we have our character, but he doesn't really do anything. We can see this play button at the top here. It'll let us play test our game, and it's not really much of a game. The player just kind of falls. Right, and he falls because we gave him gravity. We can see in rigid body 2D, this is essentially making our guy work, like in the Unity physics engine, right? So he is interacting with gravity right now on a scale of 1, so not particularly interesting for a platformer. So if we want him to not just fall off the screen all the time, we have a couple options. We can either make him not affected by gravity, which is not what we want, right? It's a platformer, of course he's going to fall when he jumps eventually, but he's got to have something to land on, so we can come over here and make a new object. Let's make another square, why don't we? And this time we'll grab one of these anchor points, and we'll just drag it out a little ways. This will be our platformer, right? So now, we have a little platform for our guy, and we'll make this red. No, we don't want to make it red. Red implies that you shouldn't touch it. We'll make it like gray. Or black. How about that? We'll make it black. It's like a rock, right? Not going anywhere. Now, we'll save the scene with Control S, or you can always go up to File and click Save in the top left. We hit play, and he falls right through it. He does not care to interact with our platform whatsoever. So we got to fix that. And what we need to do to our platform is give it a rigid body as well. But this one isn't going to use gravity. It's going to fit perfectly still. It's just gonna big chill there, right? And you can see it has discrete collision detection. That's what we want. And when we hit play, after doing that, after we give it a rigid body, what you'll notice is he still falls through it. Why does he fall through it, even though we gave it a rigid body? It is because neither one of them, while they're both affected by gravity, neither one of them technically have a hitbox yet. They don't count as interacting with each other. So we'll click on our square, which, by the way, we'll right-click and rename him to player for now, so we can see him up here. And if we right-click in the hierarchy, which is what this menu over here is called, that's how we create new things, but you can also just hit this arrow in the top left. So we'll rename this platform to platform. Simple enough, and maybe we'll make it a little bigger for now. Okay, what we need to do is give our player a hitbox, something that says, don't let things come inside this box, right? And to do that, we will add a collider, a box collider 2D, because he is a box. Boom, and we don't really have to do anything with this. It'll work just as it is. I'm gonna turn this sound down just a little bit more. This is a little bit loud, at least on my end. I don't know if it's loud on you guys' end. Haven't seen anything about it being loud for you guys, but it is just a little bit annoying for me anyway, so turn that down just a bit. Okay, so now our player has a box collider, and what we need to do now is give our platform a box collider as well, just like we did with the other one. Oh, see, I messed up here. I gave our platform a rigid body, which is not what we need to do. We needed to give it a rigid body 2D, not a just standard rigid body, because then it won't work with a box collider 2D. Although I believe in the case of this platform, just the box collider will work just fine. We don't need to actually give it a rigid body because the platform isn't going to be interacting with physics at all, right? At least this one isn't. It's just going to be a static little platform. So now we have our, we have a game here, right? We have a platform and we have a player, but, you know, I'm pressing on my keyboard and pressing on my mouse. He's not doing anything. He's not interacting with my inputs, which is, by definition, not a game. So we need to start scripting, which is going to be writing some code to tell our game what to do. And what we're going to do in this tutorial is just write script to move our character. So I hope you guys are tracking so far. Looks all okay. Yep. And again, if you have any questions, just feel free to throw them in the chat, and I'll get to them just as soon as I see them. I have a little overlay here to look at that. All right, so let's go to our scripts folder that we created earlier. And I'm gonna hit create, right click here, right? Hit create. We're gonna create a new C# script. And we're going to name this script, let's call it player controller. This is going to allow us to control the player. Boom, player controller. Okay, so now we have a script set up here. I'm going to go ahead and open it. And when I open the script, whoops, there we go. When I open the script, you will now see this is Visual Studio Code that I'm working with. It shows everything that the script contains. It just has two basic functions. You can see the class name that we named it, player controller, and then we have a start function and an update function. For the most part, we're going to be using the update function. So in our update function, we are looking for a couple of things. First, we are going to, well, actually, let's briefly head back to the Unity program here, and I will show you something about how Unity does movement real quick. So if we just head back here real quick, okay. If we go up to the very top here, click Edit in the top left, when we scroll down to Project Settings, a little menu will pop up here, and you can click this option right here, Input Manager, which is like 5 or 6 down from the top. 6 down from the top. And there's a little drop-down menu here called Axes. I know it looks like axes, but it's axes. And these are going to be how we control our player. And what we're looking for is two things. We're looking for the name of our horizontal and vertical axes, right? So let's start with horizontal. We want to be able to get this horizontal axis and test for how we want to move the player, right? With the horizontal axis, which again is going to be left and right. So if we want to move the player left and right, we're going to need the horizontal axes. Looks like everyone is still tracking, so that is good. So let's head back to our Visual Studio here. Whoa. Okay. And what we're going to do is in update, we're going to define two new variables. The variables are going to be called input and input y. So again, X is going to be our left and right movement, and Y is going to be up and down. Sorry for tapping the mic there. And we are going to set input X to get horizontal, not get horizontal, axis. The type space for this is a little bit strange. it is, oh, sorry, it's going to be under the input functionality. So it's going to be input, which is Unity's built-in script, essentially, for defining inputs. And we're going to say input.get axis, and then we're going to put in the name for the axis, which in this case is going to be horizontal, right? Because that is our X input. Okay, so we have that, and we're just going to add a little semicolon right there. And input X, we needed to say what it is. So it is going to be a float, and a float is basically just a decimal number in essence. That's a simple way to think about it. Okay, so we have our input set up for this one. Now we just need to set up our input for this one, which is going to be the same exact thing. Input.getAxis. What's the name of the axis? This one is going to be vertical. Simple as that. Now we need to work with those values to actually create movement. So what we're going to do is at the very, very top of our script, we need to add a variable that says how fast we want our player to move. So for now, we're going to call that float, right? Because it's going to be a decimal value. We'll call it speed. And we'll say 5.0. By the way, you need to add F at the end of floats because it just how Unity likes things written. It's specifically C#, but it wants you to add this little F at the end of your floats, right? This is going to be 5.0, and we can actually edit this if we make it public, because it actually defaults to private. If we make it public, we can edit this directly from within the Unity editor, so that's a neat little trick for you guys to use. Okay, now we have our speed set up. What we're going to do now, very, very simply, is we're going to define a new vector3, and we're going to call it movement, because this is how our character is going to move, so it makes sense. And a vector3 takes 3 components. Let's say vector3 movement is equal to a new vector3 with the following components. The first component is our X component. We can see if we use this menu here that we can use creates a new vector with given XYZ components. So our X component is going to be input X, right? And it's going to be multiplied by our speed value. All right, and then our second component is going to be input Y. And that is also going to be multiplied by our speed value, right? Because that just modifies how fast we're moving. And then because we don't want to change where our character is on the Y axis, or sorry, the Z axis, because it's just going to be a 2D platformer, we're going to set the Z movement always to 0. So I always mix up Y and Z for some reason. Okay. Now, one more thing that we want to do is this update function is reading every single frame. And while to the computer that makes a lot of sense, to a player visually it doesn't, because it would be adding this movement to your player every single frame rather than a way that a player would see it, which would be like every single second, right? But we're just going to take movement and we're going to multiply it by time.delta time. Oh, come on now. Movement times equals time.delta time. All this does is it says, okay, we want our movement value, movement times time, delta time. We want our movement value to be displayed in terms of seconds or to be updated in terms of seconds rather than in terms of frames. All right, finally, we are going to take the transform value. If I come back here, we're going to take the transform value of our target. And transform is just where our object exists in the world space, right? In Unity, it's where it exists. And we're going to translate it on now by movement. Why does it not like translate? Like lowercase? That is quite strange. Oh, my bad. I accidentally capitalized transform. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So we're basically saying take the transform of whatever this script is attached to. The transform again is the position of that object. And then translate, which means move it some direction by movement. So if movement is equal to 0, or if we're not inputting anything on the horizontal axis and we're not inputting anything on the vertical axis, then it will not move at all. But if we are inputting something on the horizontal or vertical axis, then it will move by the amount that we're inputting, right? Which is going to be X and Y. So we will go ahead and save that, and then we will head back to our actual Unity project after we let that code compile, which takes just a few seconds. and we are back in the Unity project. And let's see. We come over to player. We need to take our player controller script and apply it to the player, which we can do just by dragging it over here and dropping. So, boom. Now he has the player controller, and you can see that speed value is public, so we can change it from in here, which is pretty useful. So if we hit play, let's see what happens. Sure enough, we can control him now. He does have a weird jump mechanic going on here, which is not exactly what we want, but this is a great start for a platformer. So we can see we are updating his transform, his position is moving left and right, it's moving up and down, it's kind of fighting against the gravity a little bit. But that's not exactly what we want, because it turns out how we've done this movement so far is not actually influenced by physics whatsoever. So it's literally just taking his physical transform and just moving it left, right, up or down. That's fine for left or right for now, but it's not so fine as far as jumping is concerned, because you would think that jumping would be affected by gravity in some way, right? So let's go ahead and fix that right now. So if we head back into our platformer script here, or our player controller script, we can see that this is working great for the X movement, like left and right, like that's fine, but it's not really doing it for our vertical movement. What we want to do is change this movement to be jumping based, right? All right. How do we do that? How do we change the movement to be jumping based? Well, if we think about, okay, we need our jump to happen kind of all at once and then come back down, right? And we also need an input for that, right? So let's see, how do we do that, right? Well, we can use a couple of functionalities that Unity gives us. So first of all, we're going to get rid of the vertical one, right? And we're also going to get rid of input Y speed, because that really doesn't matter to us anymore, right? So we're just going to get rid of that, and for now we're going to set that to 0. So now we only have input X. And then at the very bottom here, we're going to add an if statement. We're going to say if, which is this computer saying, if this thing happens, then do this, right? We're going to say if input, we're going to go back to Unity's input section and say input dot get key down. So this is going to say when a key is pressed, do whatever's inside this it functionality, or if functionality, right? So if input dot get key down, and then we're going to say key code, which is going to say, okay, what key are we looking for? Dot, we'll make space our jump button, right? So key code dot space. Space is a pretty common jump button, right? And it's going to do whatever we tell it to do inside of this code block right here. So we want it to add an upward force to our player, something to push him up, right? So it appears like he's jumping, he's kicking off the ground, he's jumping. But in order to do that, we need to add the rigid body into the script that the player has, because the script needs to be able to access and change the player's force. It needs to add force to a rigid body, which, remember, that's how our player gets physics added, right? We're going to go public, and we're going to call it player RB, player rigid body, is equal to rigid body 2D. We're looking for a rigid body 2D, right? And this needs to be, no, not that functionality. The rigid body is added. Oh, I did it backwards. I'm so stupid. So we say public whenever you're defining variables, by the way. It needs to be first the visibility, which is public or private. Then it needs to be the type. So it's going to be rigid body 2D next. And then we call it player RB. There we go. Yeah, I've been doing this for long enough, and I still forget exactly what order these things happen in all the time. Okay, so we have added a call to grab what this is, and if we actually come back into our editor, which we'll do in just a second, we can see where we can add what we're looking for here, right? From within the Unity editor. Again, this is the Visual Studio Code editor, and the Unity editor is that screen we were seeing before. So here, we're going to say add force. We're going to add, we're going to say player RB, sorry. Player RB.add force. All right, so we're saying add force to the player RB, right? And we're going to add a vector2 force, which we're going to just say vector2. We're going to use an identity vector, which just lets us pick a direction. We're going to say up, which is just straight up. And then we're going to add a comma here and say force mode impulse. And that means it's going to add all the force right away. So it's just going to add a force a certain intensity all at once, right? And which is exactly what we want. But we also need to specify how much force we want to do. So we're going to say multiply this by jump force. And the program's going to go, what the heck is jump force? So we need to tell it. We're going to make a new public float, and we're going to call it jump force. And we'll make this, we'll make it 5.0 as well. 5.0f, because it is a float, right? So now we have this new functionality, which basically says if we press space, then add force to the player's rigid body straight up at the intensity of jump force all at once. And that is going to push the cube up all at once, and then allow gravity, to pull it back down over time. So let's go back to our editor. And once this finishes compiling, we can see how this worked. There we are, and we are back in the editor view. We come over to player. We'll see in player controller script, it's missing a rigid body for our player. So if we take our player and drag this over to this, it'll pull the rigid body right off the player and say, this is what we're looking to change, right? So we now have speed, jump force, and player rigid body set up. If we hit play, now, when we hit A and D, we still move left and right, which is what we want. W and S don't have functionality anymore, but if we hit space, oh, we get a neat little jump animation. Pretty cool. And that's not actually an animation, that is the player's rigid body physically pushing itself off the ground and then moving itself up and allowing gravity to pull it back down. So it's applying a little bit of force. And actually, we can change this force live time in the editor. So if we set this to 10, like that. Yes, to see your question there, sorry. If we set the jump force to a higher value in the editor, we can change the force of the jump, which you can see right there. But that feels like very spacey, right? What we can also do is come over to the player's rigid body and say, gravity pulls it down twice as hard, right? So gravity scaled from 1 to 2, and then boom, the gravity pulls it down a little faster. And this is already starting to feel like a platformer. It's already starting to feel like it has the makings of a great platformer. We have a little player, we can move him around, we can make him jump, and if we wanted to, we can hit this platform here and copy it. So it's literally just made a copy of that platform and then paste it back in. And if we move this over here and then hit play again, we will find that there's another platform the player interacts with now. Ooh, look at that. He gets a little spin because it's hitting the corner of the square. By the way, if you ever get that problem and you want to fix that, we go to player, and then we go to the rigid body here and open constraints, and we freeze rotation along the z-axis. And that basically just means that the player cannot spin, so it keeps it from spinning. Then what we'll do is we'll add that jump force back, and then bring the gravity scale higher again from within the editor on this side. Quick point of note, whatever changes you make to the editor in play mode are not permanent. You have to actually update the changes in the actual editor after you leave play mode for them to be set permanently. But now you'll see, we jump him up here. First of all, he doesn't spin anymore, which is awesome. But if we give him, it looks like a little bit more jump height, or alternatively, if we just move this platform down just a little bit, and this is part of like level design and making a good, making a good game. If you move this down just a little bit, now you can jump our character up here, just like a platformer, right? And check it out, we can also have him fall off the edge to his eventual doom. But we'll work on something like that a little later. This is just a kill functionality for that a little later. But this is a nice little introduction to how to build a simple platformer and get it set up for an eventual game here. So thank you everyone so much for tuning in, and I hope to see you all next time on our next stream. We're gonna be playing some fun games, doing some fun stuff. Yeah, thanks so much for tuning in, and have a great night.